Good morning, Admiral. How are you?
Doing great, Hugh. How's it going up there in Maine?
It is great because I get to go past a destroyer every few days when I drive through Bath, headed down to North New Hampshire. Admiral, I think I heard you quoted saying Prigozhin doesn't last a month. Am I right about that?
I'd give it 2 to 3 months, but yeah, I'd say at this point there's a big fat target on him. Let's face it, Dictator 101, Putin, don't let someone else humiliate you. Or you could say that old Russian proverb, never give your private chef his own army. I
Yeah.
think both of those apply here. And at the end of the day, I think Putin has to come to grips one way or the other with Prigozhin. Putin is not a forgive and forget kind of guy.
You know, Admiral, I was thinking the biography that Putin ought to be studying is Hugo Chavez, who tried a coup, was unsuccessful, went to jail for a couple of years, and then ended up being the dictator thereafter. You know, you got to keep your eye on people who shoot at the king and miss.
Yeah, yeah. As we all learned watching Game of Thrones, if you go for the king, kill the king. Don't
Yeah.
give him a chance to come back at you.
Now, Admiral, I have told the audience there are 1,000 articles on Russia. Don't pay any attention to them because nobody knows what's going on there except
Yep.
Russians. But I am going to ask you, as a military man, could he have done what he did without the cooperation of some elements of the official Russian army, which was, I mean, he got two-thirds of the way to Moscow.
Yeah, he was by all reports about 100 miles, 120 miles outside of Moscow. The forward elements of his columns, think Richmond, with tanks coming right at Washington D.C. So it was quite close, and I would assess that Prigozhin got acquiescence from some significant portion of the Russian military. They weren't willing to really throw in with him and bring their military columns into play, but they were certainly willing not to immediately charge out and stop him. And here's the thing to watch, Hugh. It's the Russian Air Force. Where was the Russian Air Force? If you're Putin in your dark tower in Moscow and you're watching these forces come up the highway, up Route 95, if you will, headed right at you, wouldn't you whistle up the Air Force and go after them the way we, the U.S., took out Saddam's forces, the highway of death? You saw a few helicopters go up, a couple of them shot down by Prigozhin's shoulder-fired missiles, but the Air Force, the Russian Air Force, stayed on the sidelines. So I think that's a long way of saying Prigozhin didn't have active support, but he didn't have anybody in significant opposition. If he had continued into Moscow, I think it's fights on and hard to say how it would have come out.
Now, Admiral, this brings up two questions a question about two stories that came up yesterday. One story from, quote, intelligence sources that we knew Prigozhin was going to do this before he did it. The second story, naval sensors picked up the explosion of the Titan submersible, and they didn't tell anyone, which is professional and correct because you don't want to destroy hope when
Yep.
they're not absolutely certain. But why do we have these things on the front page of newspapers? I don't want to know what we know on the front page of the newspapers. I don't want to tell anyone that.
Yeah, very frustrating. Two different cases here. Let's take the second one you mentioned first. The uh, undersea network of sensors, highly, highly classified. I really don't want to say any more than that about technical capabilities, but deeply irresponsible to be revealing that capability in any way. So I completely share your view there. In terms of the first thing you mentioned, did U.S. intelligence have a sense that Prigozhin was going to make a move? I think strategically it was pretty clear where this was headed. If you just watch the back and forth between the Kremlin, not so much Putin personally, but actors in the Kremlin, notably Schweiger, the defense minister, going back and forth with Prigozhin. That's been going on now for 6 months or so, Hugh. So no strategic surprise. In terms of the tactical, was he ready to jump? That's something we're pretty good at picking up because of logistics. We see the gasoline shifted. We see the way stations position. We see weapons systems loaded on the back of trucks. We picked that stuff up. So it doesn't surprise me that we were on the front foot here. I think that's less of a security bust than the second one. The second one, we should never be talking about those undersea sensor capabilities.
No, Admiral, former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo has always told me that the people at the agency are tight-mouthed, very loyal, and very, very competent. And he doesn't believe they leak in the way that other people leak. And I don't think the U.S. Navy has any interest in leaking like that. So if you're just drawing up a list of suspects, who do you suspect?
I would say it probably came from somebody on Capitol Hill. A lot of staffers up there have access to these systems. It could have come from the Secretary of Defense's team, but chasing down leakers in Washington, you know this, it's a mug's game. You never get there. And I can't tell you the numbers of times I've seen investigations open, chase people, polygraphs, suspects hauled in and interviewed, squeezing people. It never really comes to much. I will agree, by the way, with Mike Pompeo. Of all the entities in Washington, I think the CIA is the tightest and does the best job.
Now I want to turn briefly to, because you're a national security guy, Vivek Ramaswamy is going to join me next hour. And one of the things he said over the weekend is that he would quickly free Ross Ulbricht, Edward Snowden, and to the extent that he can, Julian Assange, because they've been wrongly jailed. I have a completely different view, and we'll talk about it. I just wonder what your view is, because I think spies are spies, and they ought never to see the light of day again.
100% in agreement with you. There are three really bad ideas, three bad reasons for releasing any of the people you just mentioned. Number one is it sends a terrible signal to young Jack Teixeira, Airman Teixeira type people that, we don't take it seriously and you can leak and you can kind of get away with it. Terrible. So the example. Number two, our friends, our allies, our partners, how do you think that's received by them? It makes them much less interested in providing us the high-end, very classified information because they think, if we have a culture of it's okay to leak, it's okay to take classified material home, it's okay to show it to reporters, nobody is going to want to share information with us. And then thirdly, all of the people you mentioned will, if released, pardoned, will go forward and feel very unconstrained about revealing what was in those documents. A lot of that is quite dated at this point, but nonetheless, you can't erase what they know from their minds. And if you pardon them and let them out, then they have free reign to go about and talk about it. And thus our secrets are even more compromised. So I think it's a terrible, irresponsible idea.
All right, last question has to do with your old friend, and you probably mentored him. Admiral Mark Montgomery was my guest on Friday. And Mark was talking about something I didn't know anything about, which is not unusual, long-range air-launched cruise missiles. And he used an acronym for it, and I have no idea what the acronym is. But I didn't even know he had this capacity, and it sounds like it's the answer to the problem of the Chinese Navy. What do you know about that, Admiral, and is he right?
He's, of course, right. Mark is brilliant, as you know, and someone I've worked with on multiple occasions. He was one of my operations officers at U.S. European Command. He is just terrific. He might have been talking about the JASSM, Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, but there are a number that are in our inventory and can be air-launched, some of them very long range, including variants of the Tomahawk missile. So, yes, we have that capability. A lot of that is not highly classified. So if people want to learn more about it, you can simply Google it and think about it. And I think you immediately grasp the importance of it, which is you can use your long-range air. Here is where the Air Force can play a very powerful role with their big, super heavy, long-range B-52s, which are now some of which are decades and decades old, approaching almost a century, but also the B-1, the B-2, the new the new jet that's coming from one of the defense contractors. So all of these big, long-range Air Force systems can carry these cruise missiles, and they create standoff. They can.
It was pretty interesting. He said, I want to be candid. The most important service in the China struggle is the Air Force. And I thought, what? A Navy guy? And he said, yeah, it's because of these things.
Yeah, I think he's. We could have a debate about that. But the nice thing about those long range bombers is they can travel supersonically in most cases. They can therefore come very fast from very far away and carry a pretty lethal load. So I think they are, let's put it this way, the Air Force is underappreciated in what they can deliver in the fight. So, yeah, I'll walk down that path away with Mark.
Admiral, always great to talk to you. Have a great start to your summer. I hope you get out of Florida and go someplace that is nicer than Florida in the summer. We love Florida, but not in July and August. Thank you, Admiral. Follow him on Twitter at Stavridis J. And I put the tweet out with it if you want to go and follow that over at hughhewitt.com.